My name is Steve Hart, a 41-year-old single man. I'm a local newspaper reporter in my hometown. I harbor a secret that I can't share with anyone. Truth be told, even at this age, I have no experience with women. There are various reasons for this, but in short, I guess I don't have the guts. I've had my chances. I mean, it might sound odd, but I do get approached by women from time to time. The issue of not being able to cross that final line was always a matter of the heart. After repeatedly hurting people and letting them down, I eventually got tired of dealing with people. If we're destined to break up, I figured it's better not to date from the start. That way, neither of us gets hurt, and I won't disappoint anyone by failing to meet expectations. Once I reached this state of mind, I found peace in my heart. Sure, there's a bit of loneliness, but I've come to terms with that as a price to pay for my peace of mind. The change in my life came this spring covering the local news. I was putting together a feature on cherry blossom cookies for the upcoming season. I had the chance to make these cookies at a well-established local bakery, a small shop run by an elderly couple. Their only granddaughter, Jenny, who attracted customers as they had no successor, seemed that Jenny would eventually take over. I heard she had graduated from a culinary school with a focus on pastry arts. Thank you for today. Making these traditional cookies for the first time was a great experience. I said to Jenny while enjoying the cherry blossom cookies that I made myself. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I must say, seeing you in an apron was priceless. I had met her a few times at local Chamber of Commerce parties. She was always surrounded by a lively crowd, and I could never get close to her at these events. It seems that she had properly found me, who usually drinks a small beer in the corner of the banquet hall. I always thought you were quiet and cool, so seeing you in a white apron was quite a surprise. I wish I had taken a picture for memory, she chuckled, remembering the scene. I felt a bit embarrassed. She's the face of this shopping district, a local icon with her cheerful personality and charm. She's quite the celebrity around here. Although she is concerned about being over 30 and wants to give up the face of the shop, she's still popular. Cool vibe. That's the first time I've heard that. As I showed my surprise, she shook her head. Seriously, no way. You must know that there are plenty of girls after you, Steve. Leaning towards me, she said this, and I could feel my face flushing. She smiled at me from a distance where I could clearly see her pretty nose and well-defined eyelashes. So, I'm going to take a shot here. Please, will you be my boyfriend, Steve? What? It was so sudden that I thought my ears had gone crazy. You don't want to. As she looked up at me inquiringly, I didn't know how to respond. She was charming, and she seemed to have quite a liking for me. I didn't dislike her. In fact, I might even say that I like her. But it's not that I don't like you, Jenny. I just can't be with anyone. I don't have the courage to date. I tried to respond to her feelings honestly. I told her that I didn't plan on dating anyone. She seemed to think for a moment, then quickly smiled at me. But I like you, Steve. Don't forget that. I want to continue liking you. If I ever stop liking you, I'll tell you. She said this and put her hands together as if praying. Her fingertips were slightly trembling. Upon hearing my response, she seemed to relax, the tension leaving her shoulders. From that day forward, Jenny and I started seeing each other more often. Most of the time, it was her who initiated it. To avoid giving her false hopes, I refrained from inviting her myself. I should probably refuse her invitations altogether, but I couldn't be cruel enough to turn her down. My indecisiveness might be hurting her. It might sound arrogant, but it's true that my heart takes every time Jenny invites me. Would you like to go to this great seafood restaurant I found? Day to day, Jenny had contacted me. She was always finding delicious places to eat or fun events and inviting me. As a local reporter, I really appreciated her suggestions. We arranged to meet at the restaurant over the weekend. The thought of seeing her bright smile made the weekend seem a bit more exciting. On the day of our meeting, Jenny, who is usually punctual, was unusually late. She is usually there before me, waiting with both hands to greet me. I was feeling anxious because she wasn't at our meeting place. She didn't show up even after 5 minutes. Thinking she might have had an accident, I was about to take out my cell phone to contact her when I heard, "Sorry to keep you waiting," and felt a tap on my shoulder. When I turned around, there was Jenny, looking a bit tired. "I'm sorry I kept you waiting. I was the one who invited you. I'm really sorry." Jenny deeply bowed her head as she said this. "No worries at all. More importantly, are you okay? Anything happened?" As I spoke, she lifted her head. The moment she did, I was taken aback. She was shedding tears. Passers-by glanced at us. There I was, looking like a jerk making a woman cry on the street. I felt hopeless, not knowing why she was crying. I suggested we sit somewhere and guided her to a bench. During the walk, she kept repeating, "I'm sorry," while her tears continued to flow. I was worried about what could have happened to her, my heart racing. After seating her on a park bench, I went to a vending machine and bought her a warm tea. She accepted the can of tea with both hands and said in a soft voice, "Thank you." Perhaps the warm tea had comforted her a bit. Finally, I was able to stop her tears. I waited patiently for her to share what had happened. "I'm sorry I lost my composure. I've been nothing but trouble today. I'm really sorry." I tried to comfort her, smiling and saying, "It's okay. Actually, the cat I had for a long time passed away the day before yesterday. It was old, so I know it was its time. But that doesn't make it any less sad. I remember there always used to be a calico cat basking in front of the pastry shop. So that cat had passed away. I had it with me for so long." Saying that, she began to tear up again. She had been with the cat until its last moments. I could tell from her voice that it hadn't been a painless death. Still, she had stayed by its side until the end, meeting its gaze. It's hard to have your wishes come true. She kicked a pebble at her feet as if she was a bit annoyed. Life's full of unfulfilled wishes. At my words, she nodded slightly. I've never had a pet. I'd never had a chance to raise a pet since I was a child. I had no interactions with animals. My grandparents, who raised me, didn't like animals. I'd barely have any memories of my parents. I grew up under the care of my grandparents. When I asked them about my parents, they wouldn't tell me anything. I only vaguely remembered my mother's face as she said, "I'll be back soon." She left me behind, and I never saw her again. It wasn't until I grew up that I realized I had been abandoned. I had been left by my mother. Since I didn't remember my father at all from the start, I didn't miss him. But about Mom, I have been so lonely. But I could never forgive my mother who just said, "I'll be back," and left me behind. That's why I find it difficult to form relationships with anyone. The fear of getting close to someone, knowing we might eventually part ways, is overwhelming. The thought of waiting for someone to leave me, just like my mother did, is unbearable even to imagine. When I became an adult, I could have adopted a pet, but I never did. I would eventually have to see them off. Just imagining it was painful. I confessed to my girlfriend that I can't keep pets because I can't bear to think of losing them. She looks at me surprised. It's the first time I've talked to her about myself. "Thank you. I learned something important about you, Steve." The face that was crying a while ago turned into a gentle smile. She smiled as if to cheer me up. In the end, I decided to go home without having the seafood we were supposed to eat that day. When we reached the exit of the park, she stopped. She put her finger on her lips and said, "Shay." We could faintly hear a kitten mewing. She quietly approached where the kitten's voice was coming from. Her figure disappeared into the thick of the flower bed. When she came out of the thick, she was holding 3 kittens in her arms. "I found them," she muttered, seeming a bit stunned. But still, she lovingly looked down at the kittens. "What will you do?" "Take them to the police station." She looked puzzled at my words. I'm going to take them home. I plan to raise them. What? But won't you be heartbroken again? Why aren't you scared? My true feelings slipped out spontaneously. I mean, just a while ago, she was crying about parting with a cat, and now she's picking up abandoned kittens. I can't even understand that in a few years, another heartbreaking parting will be waiting. Rather than imagining the future sadness, there's something more important. Jenny said this with a slightly sad smile. Are you afraid of dating me, Steve? Her words hit the bullseye for me, and I am at a loss for words. I felt a cold sweat trickling down my back. I won't leave you, Steve. Can't you trust me just a little bit? In Jenny's hands, the kittens were looking at me. She was looking at me with the same pure eyes. I thought that if I couldn't take a step forward here, I would be alone forever. I may not be perfect, but I'd appreciate your understanding. At my response, Jenny nodded vigorously and laughed, saying, Leave it to me. Half a year after we started dating, it came time to greet her parents. I had met her grandparents, who run a traditional bakery, several times, but this was the first time meeting her parents who live in a different place. Fortunately, her parents warmly welcomed me. I was tense all the time, but it seemed to be okay. My name is Steve Hart. I'm in a relationship with your daughter, with marriage in view, I said as I moved to bow in their direction. When I raised my face, her mother, Emma, covered her mouth with both hands, looking at me with a surprised expression. Har, you said Steve, right? Excuse me, but is your mother named Lisa? Why was my mother's name coming from Emma, whom I had met for the first time today? I was so surprised that I couldn't respond immediately. Her parents were waiting for my answer, holding their breath. Taking a small, deep breath to compose myself, I replied, Yes, my mother's name is Lisa. But I don't remember much about my mother after she left me at my grandparents' house. She never came to pick me up. There was no point in lying. I told the truth. Upon hearing this, Emma began to shed large tears. You resent your mother, don't you? Her voice was shaking with tears. Yes, if I said I didn't, I'd be lying, I admitted. At my answer, Emma began to sob uncontrollably. Her husband quietly hugged her. I was confused by her repeatedly apologizing to me in a low voice, saying, I'm sorry. As if she had sensed something, Jenny stood up and brought a picture from the shelf, handed it over to me quietly. I looked at the photo. In it were her smiling parents and my vaguely remembered mother, standing shoulder to shoulder. Wait, this is my mom. With her emotions settled and tears finally stopped, Emma began to speak slowly. My mother and her parents had met in Colorado. My mother was a photographer who accompanied high-altitude mountain ring trips. Even on the day of this photo, she was in the mountains as part of a TV program staff. Her parents loved mountaineering, and they had encountered my mother several times up on the mountains. Not long after this picture was taken, Emma slipped and fell, calling for help. My mother ran down the mountain as fast as she could. Apparently, the radio that the staff had brought along was unusable due to an error. As a result, Emma, who had slipped, was rescued by the rescue team that my mother called for. But my mother, it seems she had a heart attack at the mountain cabin and never returned. My mother was the savior of Emma's life. What a coincidence. But why did my grandparents hide the truth about my mother? I had always thought my mother abandoned me. She didn't abandon you. She just couldn't come back. When I later confirmed it with my grandparents, they said that it was my mother's dying wish not to tell me about her death. My mother, who was a professional photographer accompanying high-altitude climbers, had always said she didn't want me to know if she ever died on the mountain. She didn't want me to hate the mountains. My mother loved the mountains. And if I didn't know she had passed away, I wouldn't have to grieve, she used to say. I think it's a selfish claim, but somehow I felt like I understood my mother's feelings. It's such a strange connection. Must be your mother's mischief, Emma said with a gentle smile. I will definitely make Jenny happy, I declared clearly to her parents. The next moment, Jenny hugged me happily. I'm not alone anymore. Thinking so made me feel more determined. When the wedding preparations were in full swing, I stayed at her apartment for the first time. It's embarrassing, but it was my first night with her. As the weather forecast announced the arrival of the harsh winter, it was very cold. She was excited and said, I got a new heater. I was nervous, and my hands were sweaty. Gently, okay, just as she whispered, and I gently reached into the heater. I heard a cat's voice. I tried to pull my hand out quickly, but it was a moment too late. I felt a sharp pain on the back of my hand. Ouch, it got me. When I pulled my hand out and checked, I had 3 scratch marks on the back of my hand. Oh, I thought you two would get along, she said with a disappointed face. Now, my nemesis are the kittens she picked up that night. Although they're kittens, they've grown quickly. It seems they don't like my presence, and they're on guard against me. Ever since I first set foot in the apartment, attempting to touch the peaceful kitty under the heated blanket, I was immediately rebuffed. Since we'll become a family once we're married, I'd like to establish friendly relations with them. Tonight, however, the little guy hissed at me. They might think I'm trying to steal her from them. I, on the other hand, want to enjoy the soft feel of a cat for the first time, but I refuse and it gets me down. Hey, don't be so upset. They'll warm up to you soon, she comforts me, but a sense of anxiety lingers. Thinking too far ahead is your bad habit, isn't it, Steve? Indeed, I do often overthink the future, and it leads to a lot of anxiety and hesitation. Whenever that happens, she's always there to give me a gentle push. With a broad smile, she assures me everything will be all right. I can't tell how much I have been saved by those words spurred on, but I faced my mother's death. I dug up an old newspaper article about my mom. Together, we visited the site. Upon reaching the cabin, I found a picture of my mom among the photos hanging on the walls. In the picture, my mom had a big smile on her face. Looking at that smile, tears welled up in my eyes. She gently rubbed my back, soothingly. At that moment, an older member of the rescue team walked into the cabin. His eyes welled up as he looked back and forth between the picture and me. He smiled and said, "We've been waiting for you." He was apparently an old friend of my mom. He said he recognized me right away because I looked so much like my mom. I knew you would come visit someday. I've come this far in search of my mother's happy moments. Upon hearing this, he nodded emphatically. Then he pointed at a section of the wall and said, "Read this." There, I found messages written by regular visitors to the cabin. Among them, I found my mother's words. "Enjoy life even when you can't see what's ahead, Lisa." Finally, I received a message from my mother. Tears of joy, tears of sorrow, and tears of regret for having resented my mother all flowed out together. Unstoppable, she gently took my hand. "Next time, we'll bring our son or daughter along." Lisa, yes, we'll come and show your grandchild. Telling this to my mother's smiling face in the photo, I felt as though she gave a slight nod. It felt as though one long journey had come to an end. Within me, from now on, my journey won't be a solo one. I'll live life to the fullest, even if the future is uncertain. That's the promise I made to my mom, because I believe that's the kind of life she wanted for me. Certainly. Here's the text punctuated and formatted into short paragraphs without missing any lines. How was that? Subscribing to our channel can motivate us to create more content. See you in our next video.